legacy of the red, white, and blue.
It's time for Veterans Issues, the show that brings you information about veterans, military, and their family. Now here's your host, Ken Rollins.
Welcome to Veterans Issues, Ken Rollins. Today we got two people here. This is TBI month, that's Traumatic Brain Injury Month, and we got two people here from the state of Alabama, and we got, make sure I got this right, Scott Powell, who's the Executive Director, and Pat Motley, who's the Resource Coordinator. We'll get into all that when we come back. Stay where you are and get you a pen. Be right back. Welcome back to Veterans Issues. Appreciate you tuning in this week. This week, because it is Traumatic Brain Injury Month, we've got the people here that run that program for the state of Alabama. I got the Executive Director, Mr. Scott Powell, and I got Pat Motley, who's the Resource Coordinator. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you.
Good to see you, and good to see you again.
Good to see you, Ken.
Had about 2 years been?
Has been.
Yeah. And who was the director?
Charlie Priest.
And he passed away.
He did.
He was a good man.
He was a great man.
I really liked him for the time I got to know him. And that's got to be, Scott, we knew something about Charlie, and we know something about Pat. We'll get into all that, but where do you hail from?
I originally from Hoover, from the Birmingham area. So I was a St. Vincent's baby, where babies come from. So I was born there, and have lived in pretty much Birmingham my entire life, with the exception of a small excursion to Chicago. That's
unusual. I would have given it that you was from some other part, like producer back there. She's from some country called Michigan, Detroit area, man. I know that third world country, I think it is.
In Alabama, since I lived in Chicago, I had to turn in my official ability to claim to be from the South, and there's a waiting period when you get back home where you have to, and then after 9 years I reapplied and have now been accepted again as being a Southerner, so I think I'm okay now.
Had a lady on here last week, I believe it was, they've got this weekend here in Oxford, or the last weekend of March, we got the Southern Gospel, 3 days of it, and I asked her, what's the difference between Southern Gospel and Northern Gospel? And I got you know, there is no answer, but it's all the same. But you don't hear in Chicago what you hear down here. Anyhow, that's I want to welcome you to the show, because you got a heck of a responsibility with this, and the TBI, traumatic brain injury. Which one do you want to explain what that is for the folks out there? The terminology TBI, traumatic brain injury, is what?
Normally, and you're not the first person to ask that, and I'm sure a lot of people wonder about it too, because when you hear traumatic brain injury, typically with the word traumatic in particular, people tend to automatically assume that it's not something that's impacted them or anyone that they know. It sounds horrible, it is horrible, but once you start to have some initial conversation, it's really amazing how quickly you find out that just about everybody you run into knows someone that has experienced a traumatic brain injury. In our case, to really think about what it means is probably more common to think about how it occurs, which kind of then paints a picture as to what it is. The most common causes of traumatic brain injury, the first and by far the most common cause, are falls. And right now, unfortunately, with an aging population, with people living longer, living independently longer, the majority of those tend to take place within our senior population. People who are living at home begin to lose their balance and they fall, and you usually hear people talk about that it's the broken hip that you always worry about with your father or your grandfather who's living by himself, or same thing for your grandmother or your mom living by herself. But it's also when they fall and they try and catch themselves, it's the likelihood that they've also struck their head. And the brain is just like every other part of the body. It can bruise, it can bleed, it can sustain injury, and sometimes the brain is an amazing organ in that it can repair itself, it can create new pathways and find additional ways to continue functioning. But every time you sustain a hit to your head like that, there are going to be lasting effects. And we work with people who have any range of those lasting effects, from where you could meet someone and have no idea that they'd ever suffered a brain injury, to someone where the signs, either because of physical impairment or cognitive impairment, are really very noticeable. Motor vehicle crashes, another very common reason why people suffer or sustain a traumatic brain injury. But in today's society, probably the most common causes in terms of things that make the news and things that you hear about that have really brought a lot of attention to the populations that we work with would be sports-related concussions. You really can turn on the news almost any day and not hear about some new study or some player that's decided. Just this morning, saw where a 24-year-old linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers is retiring. Just quit. Walked away due to head injuries and the fear of additional head injuries. And that's, he was, and I know to you and I, $450,000 is a lot of money, but he was still,
say it real fast.
he was still on his rookie contract and had a much larger, opportunity of earning potential ahead of him, and he walked away because of that. And then obviously you've got a lot of individuals who are returning from overseas duty with the military.
Yeah, well, let me hit you on that, because you stole my thunder about saying, because
I'm terribly sorry.
No, don't do that again. No, that's great, because you explained it a lot better than I would. But now you're hitting on something. I've got a young man. Do you know Matt Bain?
I do.
Matt Bain is a Marine, and he's discharged on medical discharge because of a TBI, IED explosion. And when I first met Matt, we had a conversation in a restaurant before we went for the taping. 15 minutes later, he had no idea what we had talked about earlier, and it was real. He had no idea, and that's one of the things that goes with TBI, I found out, is a memory. But somebody would take that, oh, you're just being selective memory. You just didn't, I told you, but you just didn't want to do it. But I saw the real, over the years I've seen, but you meet him somewhere, you think he's as normal as anybody else, and normal is whatever you want to call normal, but he has a TBI that's legitimate, and his is a memory. But all head injuries don't result in TBI, do they, Pat?
No, they don't. They don't. You can have any number of different problems from TBI. One of Matt's problems is short-term memory loss, and it is significant.
Yeah.
Matt and I were on the show together.
How about that? I
Yeah, we were. We were.
But I would think that, some of the, we have down at our veterans home, we have dementia and Alzheimer's units, but the older gentlemen from World War II on here, they have long-term memory, great, but they can't remember short-term. They can remember.
Right.
I've had them on here that told me what the temperature was in 1941 on December the 7th.
Right.
What they ate when they went to Honolulu the night before, but they couldn't remember who brought them to the show.
That's right.
And that is weird. Now, Scott, with the shaken baby syndrome, does that same thing happen? Is that the way it is, or Pat, whichever one?
It does, and it's every brain injury is tragic, but it's probably the most tragic when you think about it, because you're really robbing a child of their future, because the brain at that point in life is so fragile. The brain is fragile at all times, but a child is in such a fragile state, and it's one of those. You wish you could eliminate every cause of brain injury, but if you could identify the one that you'd like to most get rid of first, I think everyone would agree that that's it, because the stories behind it are just, they just break your heart.
Pat, we got less than a minute. We got a 45 second we'll talk about. I saw some of the numbers I saw was 10,000 annually in the state of Alabama.
Yes, every year in the state of Alabama, 10,000 people will sustain a head injury. It's a lot of people.
Wow, that's a lot of people for the state of Alabama. We got to go to a break. Come back. We're going to talk more about TBI. You might want to get you a pen. We got a number you can call. Stay where you are. Welcome back to Veterans Issues. We're talking with Scott Powell and Pat Motley. We're talking about traumatic brain injury. And in Alabama, I said we had 10,000 annually. But we got, let's see, the other thing that I saw that caught my eye was how many people die each year. Do you remember that number by any chance? 138 people. Is that a day? I said 130 people in the U.S. die of injuries that include TBI.
Yeah.
I don't know what that length of time is, but there's a lot of people. I knew some kids that was into playing basketball, and they went past the goal and hit the front of the auditorium stage. Concussion? No, TBI.
Right.
But back in the 60s, it was a concussion.
Concussions are TBIs.
Started changing. Then they start. I don't know how long TBI has been designated, but I didn't hear about it until a few years ago. Is that correct?
It is, and in sports especially, it was, you know, and I'm sure you're much like I was, that when you fell down when you were a kid, your parents said walk it off, and that's pretty much how we dealt with concussions in sports up until really within the last 10 years. I know a guy that played for Auburn, and in the middle of the Auburn-Georgia football game in the 70s, he was knocked unconscious on the field and took a series off and was back in the game again. And you would never hear of that happening today, but it's what happened. So we're starting to see now with some of those athletes who probably sustained multiple concussions in sports, that you're starting to see them develop some of those initial memory issues, some of the, you know, and it just starts off with little things like I used to could remember that and now I can't, and we're realizing that it's the long-term effects of multiple TBIs in the form of a concussion, and you're starting to see the impact of what that means to someone when they're in their late 50s and early 60s.
Well, let me ask you something. I'll throw you a curve. Yeah, a parent out there has got a kid playing sports, or whether it's soccer or whether it's football, what are some of the things they should look for that would be a giveaway?
Well, if their grades start to drop, if their moods change, if all of a sudden they want to sleep more, or they're just not the same as they have been before. If they don't seem to be able to contain their temper like they did before. Those are things that might be a red flag.
But you got little Joey that's acting like that, and you don't know whether it's just a growing thing. You say, well, he's going through a phase. Remember that saying? Mm-hmm. But you notice something like you're talking about there, like the anger, snapping out. Mm-hmm. You go to your local MD, and they're going to say, but you've got to provide something. Joey was playing football the other day, and he took a lick.
Right.
And since then, I've been noticing he's this. That would help with the doctor giving a correct diagnosis.
Right.
Am I right?
Absolutely. If you as the parent will ask the child first, did something happen at practice? Ask the coach, ask the other friends, if there were any other parents there that day. Did you notice anything that happened? Because sometimes your child might not tell you because they might be afraid that you're going to make them miss the game. So a lot of times things will happen at practice and it not get reported. Yeah. So
well, the coach, it's up to the coaches too to say, Ms. Jones, Joey took a hit out there. I think he's okay, but kind of keep your eye on him.
Absolutely.
That responsibility there too.
Absolutely. In games, it has to be reported, and the children have to be cleared to be cleared by a physician to get back into the field of play after they sustain a hit.
Yeah. I was saying, they changed it. The recent TBI just came up. But if I think back, you're not old enough, but back in the day, the World War II was called shell shock. The grandpa was acting this way, shell shock, but it was post-traumatic stress disorder. Absolutely. Back then. It just got a branded new name in the 80s sometime. And so you had the same thing. You had TBIs back then when we was jumping off of them hills and landing in the shallow water. We got TBIs, but we didn't know it, So we got to have parents who can recognize. And I was telling y'all earlier, I was out here with a league of our own this past weekend. A lot of TBI children out there. And their lives, they end up being 12 years old in a 5-year-old, 6-year-old body. And that is something parents really become challenged with. So the TBI, what do you do as an organization that helps the family? Is it something my kid has TBI, you can guide me for training for that kid? What do you do?
I'm going to defer to Pat in a second, but I'll take the initial piece. Our mission statement says that we work to improve the quality of life for individuals, and what it means, and you said it yourself, is the fact that TBI is a little bit different. When you have someone that's diagnosed with cancer, hopefully they receive treatment and then they conquer it and they're done with it. But TBI is something that once it happens, it's with you for life. Yeah. And when we take on a client, they're typically going to become our client for life. And our resource coordinators, and without being more descriptive, effectively, they do whatever it takes.
But I have seen firsthand that people that are diagnosed TBI, I have seen the progression. It's not like some of the other diseases or injuries that the person kind of stays there. These, I have seen the improvement from walking to running.
Right.
And you know
Right.
the little boy I'm talking about. He did
Yes,
it.
yes.
So is that, am I on par there to say that they can, if they get with the TBI folks like you, that you can guide them to getting some help?
Well, some can, depending on where their injury is, how severe it is, and at what age their injury occurs. There's all kind of factors that go into it. But what my job as a resource coordinator is just to find out what those needs are.
I like it's hard for you to say it as it is for me.
It is hard to say. Coordinator.
That sounds like change for a dollar bill.
But I go into the home and assess the needs, and then my job is to hook that family to the available resources in the community.
Well, we got the number on the screen, that 205-594-4353 is the number I'm putting up there. If somebody, that's the number I got, so
Okay.
somebody's going to call that number. If they don't, call me and I'll put you in touch
Okay.
with them. But if somebody, the biggest part I think about TBI is people want to think like we did in the old days. Oh, he just got a knot on his head. He just got a lump. When that swelling goes down in that knot, he'd be all right. Is that,
Yeah.
Tom, am I about where it is?
There's still a lot of the walk it off, because it's a head. It's not like there's you can't see a fracture in an arm or an open wound that's pouring blood out, and it may be why you just call me Tom, and I'll take that too. That's neat. So
Tom?
That's right.
Scott.
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 You
Tom.
answered Scott. Last week I had a guy named Ted. I called him Ted all day, but he answered
It
all
works.
the way.
Yeah, this is good. We're
I
good.
didn't- I
We're
didn't know
good.
what
But there is a lot of that still goes on, where people probably don't seek help as quickly as they could until they see signs that you just can't ignore anymore, because you want to
Yeah.
ignore it and just say it was just a
I got a
head.
little over a minute now. I want to make sure I cover everything y'all need me to cover. What am I leaving out? I got a bunch of stuff.
I would like to add that since I was last here, we have added a support group in the Jacksonville area. So if there's anybody in this county that has TBI or is a caregiver for a person with TBI, we would love to have you join our support group. We meet.
Okay, and they can call me.
Yeah, they can
See
call.
my number. You see my number right here. What?
Yes,
You
I
Right
see
under there.
that.
Right under there.
We meet on the fourth Friday of every month at the Jacksonville Community Center from 12 to 2, and we'd love to have you.
Scott, Tom. Yeah, I called him by wrong. He answered. Scott, you got anything else you want to add to it, buddy?
I'm just excited to be able to talk about it, to bring awareness to it, because it is something that people know about, people need to know more about, and I'm just happy to have someone like Pat covering this area, providing services, because without people on the ground providing the services, there are people who have needs that wouldn't be met, and we're just happy to be able to do that.
We run out of time, but I appreciate you coming here. We'll talk, every year we're going to talk about TBI, and in between time. March is not just the time I talk about it, but it's something that's real, something that I see every day. Not every day, but I see a lot of it, enough to know how real it is and how important people need to take it. Thank you for coming today.
Ken, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Good to
it.
see you, Scott.
All right.
We'll be right back with some news that you can use. Stay where you are, get the pen. Welcome back to Veterans Issues. I appreciate Scott. I started to say Tom. Scott and Pat coming down doing the show today about traumatic brain injury. Remember that, especially in March, it's a traumatic brain injury month, and it should be traumatic brain injury every month. People pay attention to it, and you folks your parents out there, don't take it for granted that Billy bumped his head and he got that knot will go down, that swelling will go down, put a little ice on it. Watch Billy for a day or so and see if he acts different, because this is serious stuff, folks. I promise you it is. Next week, I got the director. Well, wait a minute. I've been telling you that I got the director of VA coming on here, and he called me just before I got in here, and he's got to go up to D.C. And so the folks, Jeff Hester and the others are coming down, and Kathy Prelwitz and some of the people up there. We're going to talk about the choice card, about the innovations that's happening over to Birmingham VA, the new women's clinic, the new eye clinic, and my gosh, they're building their own parking over there. That's going to be a blessing. So Tom bowed out, and he'll come another day, but I told you the director will be here. But those of you that's got the choice card, like myself, you got questions about it, about where you can obtain care other than the VA, we're going to answer all those questions. The specialist for that's going to be here next week. And since we've been talking about it, that has become a national problem. People are confused about the card. And I told the director today, to me, it was kind of like at the racetrack, they put the car out in the race before they checked it out in the garage. This car has caused more problems than it has good, as far as I'm concerned. But I can tell you that the people that know what you can use it for and what you can't use it for are going to be right here on next week's show. So be sure and tune in for that. Those of you that's been calling my cell phone number, the 239-9234, that is absolutely the best way to go. You can even text me at that. A lot of people, my home is called Veterans Central, I believe. Just don't call me early in the morning, but some of you folks get up real early. And I want you to think about something that is very, very important. You didn't get your flu shots this year, but shingle shots. Got somebody that's down with the shingles right now, real bad shape. That shingle shot is important. All you got to do is go to the clinic. If you're in the Oxford area here, go to our clinic, go up south side of their clinic, Childersburg, any of the clinics, tell them you want a shingle shot, and you can get one. And that's very, very important. It's not any good until you get the shingles, and then you wish you had got the shot. So that's some good advice if you'll take it. We still need some drivers to drive the van to Birmingham. We got quite a few that volunteer to do that, take the veterans over there for their appointments, and that's you get a blessing out of that by doing that. That's a great thing. These people that do that, they give of their time, and the veterans get to their appointments, and they don't just take them over there. They actually bring them back home. If you take 5 over, you got to bring 5 back. That's about the. I want to thank all of you that. Yesterday I got some good information from the foundation that the law enforcement tag that you're purchasing for your vehicle, part of that revenue goes to help build the law enforcement memorial here in Anniston, and that also a small portion of it goes to the fallen heroes memorial for the fallen law enforcement up in Washington, D.C. So when you go to get your tag, ask them to let you see the law enforcement tag. And it'll demonstrate you don't not have to be in law enforcement, but it will demonstrate that you appreciate those that have fallen in the line of duty. It's got a rose in it, and it goes with any color car that you might have or truck, and it says a lot about you. So look at that. But when you get ready to, this past weekend, I did the announcing down at the League of Our Own. I'll be back down there this weekend and signing autographs. No, I'm just kidding you. But we had a ball down there, and We'll be down there. I appreciate all the folks from OEMS, that's the Oxford Emergency Services, the fire department. Here's a salute to you next week.